Today we're going to be talking about 10 things that get you rejected the fastest. We all want to avoid rejection, especially if we are traditional publishing. If you're indie publishing though, don't click away so fast because these things can also get you rejected by readers. That's part of the reason why traditional publishers use these as factors of rejection. So whether you're going independent or whether you're going traditional, this can be valuable for either. Alright, so first thing that I'm going to say, what gets you rejected the fastest right off the bat without your story content even having been laid out yet is neglecting to follow the formatting they request. This goes for contests as well as manuscript submissions for traditional. It also goes for indie because if you do not match the traditional standard, you're losing that reader in less than 10 seconds. Let me tell you that right now. Sometimes you can get creative with it if you're doing a children's book or a book of poetry, but even then with books of poetry, a lot of people prefer the traditional format. That being said, the best way to avoid this is obviously to follow whatever formatting they tell you. Doesn't matter if you hate the font, doesn't matter if you hate the font size, doesn't matter if you don't want to double space it. Do whatever the contest or the traditional publishing house requests of you. And for indie authors, do whatever the traditional publishing house would request of you for a final manuscript. Generally, it's Times New Roman. That's generally the acceptable font. I've seen a couple others, but generally Times New Roman is the font. 12-point font is also generally recommended. Some books have slightly smaller font, maybe 11, but doesn't ever really go smaller than that, doesn't ever really go bigger than that. Another thing is, if you're submitting it to a publishing company, generally they'll always require double-spaced. Same thing with most contests. As far as indie publishing goes, you will need to keep in mind that having it double-spaced when you send it to an editor is important, but once you are submitting it for actually being published, you are going to want it to be 1.5 spaced. So not single spaced, but almost single spaced. Slightly more than single spaced. And your tabs are going to be half the size that they normally are, but you're still going to have tabs. Speaking of which, that is important to note too. Improper page formatting. So this is not font size like we just talked about, but this is also something you can get you rejected for. If you have no paragraphs, it's just one big blob of text. Gone. Your readers will hate it and your publishers will hate it. There's no way they will accept that. No tabs. Even if you have paragraphs, having no tabs really bothers people. Now, are there some situations in which you don't need a tab? Yes, but those are rare. Most of the time, I'd say when in doubt, use a tab. The next thing is not using dialogue quotes and not using proper formatting so we can tell who's speaking. That is a huge problem. If someone is reading your writing and they notice that your dialogue formatting is super screwed up, done. A reader will not tolerate that because they don't have the patience for it, and a traditional publisher will not tolerate that because you clearly didn't put the time in to actually bother formatting it correctly. Now, if you don't know the formatting, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with not knowing the formatting. Plenty of people don't know the formatting. I'm not trying to diss on people who don't know the formatting. I'm just saying that publishers unfortunately see that as a sign of neglect, irregardless of whether it is or not. If you do not know how to format properly, please email me at C as in cat, I-N as in, Newt, GALLS at americanfork.gov, and request formatting paper. I have a cute little formatting thing that I have where the narrator is talking you through how to format things properly, and I give examples on the page. So if you're really struggling with, I have no idea how to format my writing properly, that's totally fine. No shame in that. But you do need to learn how, because it will be important for both contest submissions, traditional publishing submissions, and for indie publishing. No matter how you're publishing, if you're publishing, it's important. Next thing is submitting a story that is not the genre that the publisher works with or doesn't follow the prompt if you're doing a contest. This is a guaranteed way to get yourself rejected very quickly. If you are submitting a horror story to a romance publisher, that is going to get thrown in the trash faster than you can possibly imagine. And same thing with a contest. If you're submitting to a scary story contest, a comedic romance that has absolutely no scary elements to it, that's going to get thrown out. However, if it says, hey, romantic comedy contest, you can do spooky themes, you can do, like the contest I just did, I said you can do any theme, you can do fantasy, mystery, murder mystery, you can do anything to your heart's content so long as it has romance involved. As long as it has a date involved was the original prompt. But the point is that you still follow the prompt. You still follow the genre that the traditional publishing house goes for. It's not that your book is bad, it's just that traditional publishing houses have specific genres they work with, and if you don't fit with the specific genre, they aren't going to publish you. Next thing is giving a traditional publishing house a query or cover letter that is longer than a single-sided page. Some people are acceptable with longer than single-sided page query letters, but 99% of publishers and agents will say, nope, I don't have the time for that. It's like a resume. With resumes, you want to make sure that you have it on a single-sided, single page, right? Same thing with a query and cover letter. If they are noticing that it's going on 4, 5, 6 pages, or even a double-sided single page, they're going to go, nah, you're rambling too long, taking up too much of my time. I'm out. Unfortunately, even if that's not necessarily the case, that is the bias. Again, there's a lot of bias in the publishing world, not necessarily saying that your project is good or bad if you don't follow any of these. These are just things that traditional publishing houses and readers and contest submitters expect from you. Next, make sure to reread your draft and check for glaring errors. For example, if the character name changes partway through, traditional publishers don't like that. Readers aren't going to like that. Generally, no. If you switch tenses every few sentences, again, that's another good way to get nixed very, very quickly because it shows neglect to a publisher, even if that's not true, and to a reader, it's too confusing to bother wading through. Next is having confusing details or no details at all. If you are like, hey, I'm in a kitchen, and that's fine, but if you're like, I'm standing in a room, and then 2 seconds later you pull out a knife. They're like, where'd the knife come from? You're like, oh, I'm standing in the kitchen. They're like, where in the kitchen? That's too little details. That's a problem. And that's going to get you thrown out because of the fact that your readers are going to not like it and be confused, and your publisher is going to be confused, which, again, we don't want to confuse them. Another thing that's problematic is when you add too many details to the point where it gets confusing. For example, if they are sitting in a grove of trees and then all of a sudden you're like, the ocean waves lap at their feet, and then you're like, oh, and also it's sunset, but also the stars are out because it's completely pitch black. That's too many details that don't make sense all in the same area. Either they're by the beach or they're in the forest. Pick one. Either it's nighttime or it's still twilight. Pick one. You need to make sure that you're consistent with your details if you have a lot of details. Next thing that you want to avoid that's going to get you thrown out real quick is what's called info dumping. This is where you give a bunch of information that is either relevant to the plot but could be slowly sprinkled in throughout the rest of the story, but you just assume to just give it all at once. Or alternatively, it is when you give a ton of information that is not relevant to the plot, but you think is cool. I'm glad you think that's cool. No, nothing wrong with thinking things are cool. That's great, but unfortunately, the publisher won't think that's cool. If it's not plot relevant, or if it's not plot relevant yet, or if you could slowly put it throughout the novel, those are all superior ways of doing it. You don't want to just bleh it all at the front. The next thing that gets you nixed really fast is a useless prologue. Now, I specify useless because of the fact that there is a lot of people out there who believe that all prologues are useless. So I would just check, make sure that when you're submitting to agent or traditional publishing house, you check and see how they feel about prologues. See if they mention how they feel about prologues. Because if they mention, like, I see a prologue and I'm out, you don't want to submit a prologue to them. Maybe call it a chapter 1 and then do a time skip into the future. Just don't. However, if you are doing a indie published book, or if you are traditionally submitting and you know they aren't biased against prologues, they still will be biased against useless prologues because of the fact that there are a lot of useless prologues out there. So if they can't tell why the prologue is meaningful to the story within the first page at least, they'll throw your manuscript out because they're like, "Okay, you're just info dumping on me," or "Okay, you're giving me information that has no purpose." So in that case, make sure your prologue isn't useless. Make sure it is plot pivotal to the story, and make sure that your person that you're submitting to isn't biased against prologues, because a lot of people are. Next thing that you'll get thrown quickly out for is a Marty Stu or Mary Sue character. This is when they are so perfect that their only flaw is maybe that they have a slight gap between their teeth, but otherwise they have perfect superpowers, a perfect life, and everything is going great. That is really obnoxious. It actually really bothers readers, and it also bothers readers when their only flaw, quote unquote, is mental health struggles. Mental health struggles are very real and very much a struggle and very much an issue, but that's not a flaw. That's something they struggle with. That's not a character flaw. A character flaw is, for example, when they think that they're stronger than they actually are, and so they keep injuring themselves, or when they get too confident and so as a result they end up failing, or even better, when they have a lot of try-fail cycles in order to get to that power, that ultimate goal, or that ultimate success. Trying and failing over and over again is part of life, and it's part of reality. It sucks, but it's true. And so you need to make sure that you're implementing those try-fail cycles and implementing the "I am not perfect" part of their lives. All right. Last thing that I'm going to talk to you guys about today is synopsises. Now, a synopsis is slightly different than what you use in your query letter, actually. A query letter is when you introduce them to, "Hey, here's my genre, here's my word count, and here's a basic little kind of spicy tidbit about my story, like, you're intrigued, but you don't give the whole story away." Whereas a synopsis is when you have anywhere from 500 to 1,000 words, depends on the publisher and agent, so make sure you check, but generally 500 is more acceptable, so I'd say lean towards 500, and then if you need to add more, you can add more later. But generally lean towards shorter. With a synopsis, it covers the whole plot, all the details. With a query letter, it's like that, just a little kiss of interest, so to speak. It's like a little kiss on the cheek to the editor to be like, "You want more? Come here." You're kind of trying to, intrigue them into your story. Whereas a synopsis is you literally just tell them, "Here's what happens in the beginning. Here's what happens in the rising action, here's what happens in the climax, and here's what happens in the end." If you do not tell them how it ends, if you don't tell them how they got from point A to point B, they aren't going to bother reading your story because you clearly don't know how to write your synopsis right. Again, this is a bias that happens with traditional publishing. There are a lot of biases in traditional publishing. It's a similar process to getting accepted into a college. There are a lot of colleges out there that are like, if you don't have a certain ACT score, if you don't have a certain LSAT score, then we're throwing you out, right? You got to get a certain score in all these different tests. Traditional publishing is basically the same thing. The only difference is that the way they throw you out is these things. These are the things that they use to throw you out. Because they need an excuse, just like colleges need an excuse. There are so many worthy candidates, they need reasons to throw them out. And so these are the reasons. However, I will say a lot of these, like I said, do actually have validity for why readers would throw them out too, which is part of the reason why they throw them out, because traditional publishing is a business. That being said, you should hold yourself to the same standards as traditional publishing if you're indie publishing. You're going to have more success as an indie published author if you hold yourself to the same standards as traditional publishers hold their authors to. All right. Thank you so much for this wonderful YouTube video. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, and if you like it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much.